matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
We are live. Taylor, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. I'm very upbeat and positive.
I love it. My husband and I were talking yesterday because his chat GPT, they're very professional, and mine were like friends. Like, does yours use emojis when it talks to you?
Yeah.
Like his doesn't. His is like a thing. So I asked it a question about a sink, and we like had a whole conversation about it. And then at the end, it said, "Enjoy your new sink era." And Juan was like, "I can't believe it talks to you like that."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I also like just talk to it every now and then. I sound like a crazy person now, but every
Well,
now and
everyone
then when
does.
I'm bored, I'll like literally just talk to it. I'll be like, tell me a funny joke. It's like, what about this? And they'll, like tell me joke. Like, you know,
Yeah, no, I think most people, I think a lot of people do.
I
Um,
I thought most people probably just use it like a secondary version of Google where they just type their question and then that's it. But like, I'm like sharing screenshots with it. Like, hey, what do you think of this? And
yeah, my nail lady uses it as a therapist. She told me that.
seriously,
Yeah.
you can
She
do
said,
that?
well, she said, yeah. I mean, you can be like, I pretend that you're a behavioral therapist, and I'll probably be like, well, not officially, but da 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 da, I help you.
Interesting. All right.
hmm
Well, lessons learned.
Anyway, we'll talk about how AI destroyed humanity in a future episode that we will record from our
Or
bunker.
enriched humanity, Taylor. That's
Okay,
also
or that,
possible.
and or, because we are doomed to fail. We talk about history's most notorious disasters and epic failures twice a week, and I'm Taylor, joined by Fars, and today is my turn.
And you're gonna cover Skynet.
I should. God, we should just have an episode where we just watch Terminator 2 and talk about it.
I mean, why don't we?
I don't know. Nothing's stopping us. We can do whatever we want.
Yeah, it's like Doug does movies. Like it's
So fun.
yeah.
Um, so I read three books this week. They're short. One was literally a children's book, but like a children's chapter book. But I am not going to make you guess. I am going to tell you the story of the Navajo Code Talkers in World War II.
This is also a Nick Cage movie, isn't it?
It is. I did not watch that movie though. I should have. It's called Wind Talkers. I'll get around to it. But I read Code Talker, a novel about the Navajo Marines of World War II by Joseph Burcock. I read Code Talker, the first and only memoir by one of the original Navajo Code Talkers of World War II, Chester Nez, with Julia Scheiss Avila. They were together. And then I read this kid's book, Who Were the Navajo Code Talkers by James Buckley Jr. Um, Everything I read says Navajo. It is hard for me to not say Navajo because that's what I always said, but I'm going to try to say Navajo. Not that that is even the right word, if that makes sense.
I've always said Navajo.
Now I can't remember which one am I supposed to say. Navajo.
Not you say Navajo, but I think the way you're supposed to say it is Navajo.
Okay, now I'm gonna say Navajo. I'm gonna try.
Okay.
Okay, that's what I mean to say. I'm sorry if I mess up.
I
So
think it's I think it's like Nevada versus Nevada. Like I don't think it matters.
yeah, because I do say Nevada, and I'm from Nevada, so I think that's part of it too.
Right. That is definitely part of it.
Okay, so now I can't remember what I'm supposed to say, but the Navajo, right? Okay. They are, I'm going to talk about who they are, their history. Their history is part of the United States and their contribution to World War II via the Code Talkers. Do you know a lot about them?
I know nothing about them actually. I don't even know like the words actually don't even blend in any like I would assume that they're breaking Native American code language in Germany, but I don't know why they would. So I know nothing.
Okay, cool. Um, I've also been watching a lot of the X-Files. This is unrelated, but in the X-Files, every episode they say something and then they describe it. So it was like kind of just like this, where I'd go, Fars, what do you know about the Navajo Code Talkers? And you would say, you mean the elite group of people, da da da, and you would like answer it, like anyone has a conversation like that, but that's what they always do in the X-Files. And I was like, it'd be funny if you knew it and you said the answer like that.
Yeah, well, unfortunately not.
Um, anyway, so the Navajo people actually call themselves the Dene people. It just means the people. So in their language, they are the Dene. The Spanish named them Navajo. There's a couple places that it comes from. There was like an area they called the Apache de Navajo, and the Navajo comes from the Tiwa language that means a large area of cultivated lands. So it just kind of like came together, and now we say Navajo. Most likely, they came to the Southwest via like Alaska and Canada about 1,000 years ago, possibly because there was like a volcano that made it really dark up there, and they came down, which we've heard of before.
Southwest being what, like California,
No,
Arizona,
yes, Arizona, not California, but they're like Arizona, New Mexico, like that area.
Texas? Were they Texas?
No,
Okay.
more like in that, like between like Arizona, New Mexico, Utah is where they are right now.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Um, Largely, they hunted and gathered. They started to raise sheep and such when the Spanish came over and like introduced those animals to them. And then they did a lot of like sheep herding and would have like little towns where they would be able to trade and things like that. So, of the many issues that happened when the Europeans came to the Americas, is they would like make deals with different tribes and different people and assume that they spoke for everyone, you know? So they would make a deal with like one Navajo chief, but he was like the mayor of his town. He wasn't like the chief of all of them. And like that was not communicated and like no one really understood that. So they would like go into people's homes and be like, well, this guy said we could do this. And they'd be like, we don't listen to that guy, you know? So there was a lot of like, you know, miscommunication and exploitation of the Native American peoples in general, we know. So in the 1860s, Kit Carson, have you heard of him?
No.
They named Carson City, Nevada after him. And after this, I feel like maybe we should try to petition to not have that be named Carson City, because he was ordered to destroy just a ton of native land and a ton of native people, and him and his troops, as they were moving west, were doing just that. They In 1864, the Navajo had their own version of the Trail of Tears. We talked about the Trail of Tears before, so the Cherokee had to move out of the Northeast. This was moving all of the Navajo people to like one area, like in kind of in New Mexico. It's called the Long Walk. 9,000 people had to walk 300 miles in like the New Mexico weather. So sometimes it was cold, sometimes it was hot, and a lot of people died on the way. There's stories of like women giving birth on the trail and then just being like shot because they were like slowing everybody down.
How long did that take?
Probably a long time. It's called the Long Walk. I don't know exactly how long.
Got it. More
A
than a
while.
jaunt.
A
Let's.
while. Yeah. Yeah. And that's where they started to build their reservation where they were trade, but it was still wasn't nice. They were like trapped. They were trapped there. They were like they moved them all to one spot. They wouldn't let them leave. They were afraid of any retribution. They didn't have a lot of food. The Navajo, like in their history, they call it the fearing time. Basically, a time where everybody was scared and it was awful. So in 1868, they were able to gain control of their own area, and the Navajo Nation still exists today. It's in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. As of 2020, there are almost 400,000 registered Navajos in the United States, and about half of them live in the Navajo Nation. So it is like an area that is like pulled out of those states that is actually land-wise bigger than 10 other United States states, but it's not a state. It's like a Navajo Nation.
Yeah, it's a sovereign
Yeah,
territory. I
yeah,
think I've been through there as I drove between
probably.
LA and Dallas. I think I've driven through there because this
Yeah.
all sounds very familiar.
I think that's exactly the path that you would take is to go through it. I'd love to do a whole episode on that right now. It's super interesting. I'd love to go. But in 1868, they're able to gain control of at least that area, but they're sort of confined there. So once they're there, also the US government is still obviously super involved and they send all of the children to boarding schools. They like force them to send their children to these boarding schools. Basically, they're going to boarding school to erase all of their Navajo traditions. Like they get there and they're wearing like their beautiful clothes and they have their long hair and they're like all different and they're talking in Navajo and they're excited to be around other kids and all these things. And then they like immediately they cut their hair, which is like they don't do that in their tradition. And if you cut your hair, you have to burn the hair that came off because it's like sacred and a part of you, but they just like cut all their hair, like throw it in a pile. So that like really upsets the kids, obviously. And they make them all wear uniforms, so they kind of make them all the same. And they say you cannot speak Navajo at all. Like not even a little bit. You can't even say hi to each other in it. And they do it in like the way that a lot of these things have been done that I've heard where like they just like yell at you in English until you understand English, which is terrible.
Yeah, it's like the
And
Catholic school of teaching.
oh yeah, they're also Catholic. You're
Well,
exactly.
there you go.
Yeah. So one of the schools is called Fort Defiance, which is a fort in like New Mexico, Arizona land, and some of the Navajo code talkers went to boarding school there specifically. Um, so if they speak Navajo in boarding school, they get their mouths washed out with this like brown soap, and everybody talks about it because they remember it, like how terrible it was, like literally getting your mouth. We talked about that before, getting your mouth washed out with soap, and their hair was cut and their names were changed. So obviously we see this all the time with like people who come to another country where you don't speak their language and they try to tell you their name and they Americanize it or they Westernize it or they whatever and they make the name sound more easy to understand. But they did things like Chester Nez, who's the guy whose book I read, Nez just means tall. And then they say like, who is your dad? And he's like, oh, he's like the tall guy. That's how you like call him. So like, okay, then your name is Nez. And they gave him the name Chester. So they gave them names like Washington. They gave them names like, just like, that kind of name. There's a ton of them named John. They just like gave them the name John and then like, ran out of John. They would like do other names as well. Um,
Yeah, John Rambo was Navajo Nation.
yeah. So a lot of them are also have the last name Begay, Begay, because Begay means son of. So they say, "Who are you?" You say, "I'm son of da da da," and they're like, "Great, that's your last name." So of the 29 original code talkers, three of them are Begays. And it doesn't mean they're related. It just means that like they just wrote that down when they went to boarding school. Um, what? Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say acknowledge. I understood that.
So another thing also, the Navajo is a matriarchal society. So when you get married, you move in with your wife and her family. And if your wife dies, you stay. So like you want to have daughters, it's like the opposite. So also when they're asking these kids whether your dad's name, they were confused because they would never say their dad's name. They would say their mom's name, you know? So like, another thing as well. And they were also like wanted to like they wanted to talk to each other because they're from all different places and like they're cousins and they're excited, but they would just get in so much trouble if they spoke in any Navajo at all. They also had to be Catholic. Like I said, they kind of just added Catholicism onto like their older religions. And they also just like didn't get a lot of food, you know? Like they treated them pretty fucking terribly.
Yeah, it sounds like a concentration camp.
Yeah, for these poor children. And the whole time they're telling them like you'll never be as great as a white guy, like but try your best kind
I
of
think
thing.
they also did that at the concentration camps.
Yeah, yes, yes. So these kids are being told again and again and again and again, you cannot speak Navajo. It is bad. You have to just forget it. You have to like learn English. And they do learn English, but a little bit about Navajo, the language. It is almost, not even almost, it is impossible to learn unless it is your first language. You it there's no it's not written. There's no grammar book. So like there might be some things now that could help you like sound it out in English or like with English letters, but it was never written. It was just like a totally oral language. And unless you're born Navajo, you just can't learn it. There are white people who came to the Navajo Nation when they were kids, when they were like 2 years old, 1 years old, and learned enough to like they called it trade Navajo, where they could like talk to people at like the trading post, but they could not be code talkers. Some of them tried, but they didn't speak it well enough. Like that's how hard it is. Like if it's not your first language, you will never learn it.
Real
Um,
quick, Taylor, should we at this point say what a code talker is? Because you're using the word code talker, and I don't totally know what that is.
oh sure. Well, yeah, we're gonna develop a code using Navajo and use it in World War II.
Got it. Because it's a language that is almost a
I mean,
dead language. And if it's not a dead language, it's definitely one that nobody outside of the Americas can speak.
exactly,
Okay. Thank you.
exactly. So yes, so yeah, it's impossible to learn. It's a tonal language, so you have to be like very precise with the words that you say. And there are things that are like the example they used in Chester Nez's book is there's a different verb for picking something up depending on the texture of the thing you're picking up. So if I'm like, I'm picking up this feather and I'm picking up this cactus, the word pick up is different, So just like little things like that like you wouldn't know unless you were born and that's the first thing you spoke. That's like literally the only way to learn it. So, yes, to answer your question, in other wars, in World War One specifically, the United States used Cheyenne, Cherokee, Comanche, Ho-Chunk, Osage, and the Yaktun Sioux languages to talk in like a code. They would just like have people talking in those languages over the airwaves, and eventually those would be broken because they would find someone who spoke Cherokee, or they'd find someone who spoke Comanche and be able to like say what they were saying. So it sounded hard, but it really was like you were able to figure it out. Um, and for the most part, a lot of Native Americans fought in both World War One and World War Two and every other war that we've had. So because, they signed up to defend their homeland. And it was known that we did this during World War One. So in between World War One and Two, Japan sent a lot of people to the United States to learn those languages. So there were Japanese people who could speak Comanche, who could speak Cheyenne, who could speak those like languages because they were expecting us to try to speak in those languages over the airwaves and get around them, right?
It would suck to have done all that and learned all that, and they're doing it in Navajo now. It's like shit.
Sorry, sorry. And they didn't use Navajo because it was so complicated. They were just like, no one's going to do this, forget it, so they didn't use it. Another thing that happened in between World War One and Two, so the Navajo came back from World War One, or like all of the everyone came back from World War One, and then we're in the Great Depression, and in the 1930s, the U.S. government wanted to control trade and the land in the Navajo Nation, so they did a thing called the Livestock Reduction Act, where they killed like half or more of all of the livestock in the Navajo Nation, and a lot of people were just like thrust into poverty because they lost their livelihoods. Half of their income had come from that. Women lost their livelihoods because they would use it for like crafting, use like wool and
Wait,
such.
why do they do
Um,
that?
because they said that they wanted to control, like, there's a couple things during the Great Depression that I don't 100% understand where they like burned crops to like try to control prices. And um, they said that the Navajo livestock was like ruining the land, but I don't know if that's true. Like, I'm not 100% sure. It was like a means of control, but that was also just a terrible thing that people remember.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, I will someday try to figure out why they did that during the Depression. But now it's the 1940s and we're headed into World War II. There are about 50,000 registered Navajos. They are now the largest of the nations of the Native American nations in the United States. And it is World War II. And we talked about, technology rapidly increases during war. At the beginning of the war, you have wildly different technology than you have at the end of the war. And one of the things that they were going to need were wildly new codes and ways to dispel information. They did not use it in Germany. This is after Germany has surrendered, and we're just in the Pacific going after Japan. So in 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor, the Navajo Tribal Council passed a resolution declaring their loyalty to the United States. The resolution said, quote, "The Navajo Tribal Council and the 50,000 Navajo Indians of the Navajo tribe hereby pledge our wholehearted support to the President of the United States and to our nation in this crisis. We resolve that the Navajo Indians stand ready, as they did in 1918, to aid and defend our government and its institutions against all subversive and armed conflict, and pledge our loyalty to the system which recognizes minority rights and religious freedom." So they jumped in right away.
Nice.
Before we even declared war, they were like, "We're in. We're gonna be there." So Navajo people start enlisting. There will be, in the end, about 400 code talkers and then a bunch of other Navajos that were actually just like other parts of the military. They never really would rise up to anything like past like a colonel, but they were very, very active. So now I'll tell you what the code is. So the code is like a secret code developed in Navajo that was impossible to break. It wasn't just talking in Navajo, it was coded in Navajo and not written down. So you had to like be able to understand it in a different way. So basically, what they did is transmitting codes, as we know, is time consuming. So you have to send the code, then you have to break the code, figure out what you want to do, and then recode it and then send it back. So that like takes a really long time to do. And there is a man named Philip Johnson. He's a World War One veteran, and he had the idea to use Navajo. So in this case, just like you said, only 30 people in at this time outside of the Navajo Nation could speak it at all, like even a little bit. So definitely none of them were Japanese. They did not take it at all. They tested a Navajo translation, just like saying words over the thing, and it took 20 seconds because they're just translating. So it was just like super easy, and they're like, okay, let's give it a shot. Major General Clayton B. Vogel wanted to enlist 30 Navajo to make the code, and he ended up with 29. So no one remembers where that 30th guy went. Maybe he quit, but they're called the original 29.
So real quick, okay, so they're not just speaking in Navajo,
No.
they're speaking in a coded language.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you about him.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So he put out a call. I need 30 young Navajo men. They need to be between the ages of 18 and 32. Of the 29, at least two of them lied about their age. They didn't really have birth certificates. So one of them was 15, one of them was 35, but they were, mostly in that age group. They needed to speak fluent Navajo and English, like perfectly. And they were told there's a secret mission that only Navajo can do. We need you to do it. And so they signed up. They said, great, I'll do the secret mission. And they did basic training at Camp Pendleton, and they were really good at it. It was normal for them in the Navajo Nation to walk like 20 miles a day to do stuff and carry stuff. So they were really good at like military marching and things like that. The one thing they were not good at was swimming because they're not really swimming people because they live in the desert. So they had to learn how to swim as well because they're going to be like deployed to Iwo Jima and like have to get off boats. So they go through basic training, and after that, most of the people get to go home after basic training, but these guys didn't get to go home. They had to stay at Pendleton. They locked them in a room, kind of. They put them in a room and said, "We need you to develop a code that only the 30 of you can understand, and that you'd be able to teach other people, knowing that like Navajo isn't written down, all of the things." And so what they came up with so here's what the actual code is. It is 400 words in the code plus an alphabet plus some double letters. So words like the Navajo word for iron fish, that was a submarine, right? The Navajo word for turtle, that meant tank. And that was like, you would never be able to put that word, whatever it is, for tank in or turtle in Navajo and get the word tank out of it. Like it's not, it doesn't come from a language that like
Well,
is.
also they probably didn't have those words either, so they had to create the code because
Yes, that's part of it too, is they had to keep adding to it as they got new things. You know, like when these guys joined, they were given World War One guns with bayonets, and then like later, you know, they get better guns.
right.
But yeah, there's like new things that they've never heard of before, so they have to keep adding new words to the code. The other part of the code is spelling things out. So they had a Navajo word for every letter of the English alphabet. So, for example, the Navajo word for ant meant A. So if you're spelling out a word, you would say like ant instead of like for A to be able to spell that word. But that word like doesn't sound anything like A. They also did some double letters for common things. So like a
Oh, it
joke.
only worked because they were bilingual. It only worked because they
Yes.
could actually translate that into English from the Navajo way of saying that word. So in
Yes.
Farsi, ant is murcha.
Hmm.
So if someone were to say that, my mind clicks into, okay, you're talking about an ant. Okay, now I got to
Yes.
take that word that it starts with an M in Farsi and translate it to an A. Okay,
Yes.
got it.
Exactly, exactly. So some of the letters they had double ones, like E is the most common letter in the English language, and you could like potentially crack a code if someone's doing like double E's, like looking for the different letters. So they would have some words that had some letters had two words. So like an example that Chester Nez uses in his book is like they were like, "Hey, you want to go get a beer?" Like they were just kind of joking around. But for beer in Navajo, you could say bird, eagle, egg, rain. But like in Navajo, and then they would like in their heads they like knew it, and they'd be like beer.
Interesting. Okay.
So like that's how they were like, and then you're right that they like could translate it immediately in their heads. So they didn't have to like write it down or think about it or whatever. They like knew immediately like, okay, when you say ironfish, you mean submarine. When you say you're spelling out this word, it's just like it happened so fast because they practiced and practiced and drilled and talked in code to each other and like, but they weren't allowed to tell anybody what they were doing. So other Marines would be like, "What are you guys doing?" They'd be like, "Oh, we're just speaking Navajo," but they were like perfecting the code.
So what is a situation in which you would do the spelling thing as a word as opposed to the
Li-
word?
Like Guadalcanal.
Okay. Something comes up and you haven't
Yeah.
drilled it, so you got to spell it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, like Iwo Jima. Like you'd have to maybe they made a word for it eventually, but like they would spell that out or they'd like spell out the names of people if they needed to, things like that. Um, and again, it's tonal and nothing is written down. And so you can picture like today or even like I feel like from World War II movies, when I picture someone like doing a code, I picture like a guy in like a signal room getting Morse code, and like writing it down and then like doing it. Also, we talked about like Virginia Hall would have her little radio like in an attic in France, and like Morse code over to England as well. But in this case, they would be like on the ground with the Marines, and I feel like we think about Normandy all the time when I think of like storming a beach, but they stormed the beaches constantly in like Japan and the islands around Japan. And like you would have to jump off your boat, hold your radio above your head, and like the water would be up to your chest, and you have to like run onto the beach, and there'd be like dead bodies floating by you of someone you were just talking to, and you're like trying to get up there and all those things. So you have to like be able to do it under super intense pressure.
Not to go into old man corner here, but this is like a great example of why our generation is like so soft and weak.
For real.
Like we can
I don't
order
know
food
anyone who could
delivery
do
to our
that.
house. Like,
Mm-mm.
yeah, anyways.
No, I thought about that a lot too, because we, I was like, I know we give him a lot, we give him a lot of shit, but like also our grandpas were able to climb off boats with guns and like watch their buddies die. Like that's not great.
I biked I biked 1.5 miles to and from my workout studio yesterday, and I had to take a nap for like 3 hours when I got home.
Yeah, wildly hard. So they took them to the Pacific because they needed to capture the islands of like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima to be able to move up to Japan. This is like right before we drop our bombs when we're over there as well. So also like the Pacific Islands, while beautiful, are like really fucking humid. There's mosquitoes everywhere. One of the guys talks about how there's like giant crabs, like the ones that ate Amelia Earhart everywhere. They're like,
Had
this is
the name of
awful. And
those
you're always
crabs.
wet, like everything, you're never dry. It's just like a whole thing.
Yeah.
So they're living through all of that, and they can't tell anybody what they're doing. So in Navajo, like you never really like talk about yourself or like gloat. It's not really like part of their culture, but they were allowed to do none of that. So they couldn't tell anyone about the code, anyone how what they were doing was really important. They were just like we're regular Marines, which also is great. Thank you for your service, but also like they just weren't allowed to talk about the code. Two of the original 29 stayed back to continue to teach. So eventually they did teach about 400 different people, Navajo the code. Um, but they brought them over to the islands like Guam, that area. The first time they tested the code over the actual airwaves, people freaked out on the US side because they thought that the Japanese had it like gotten into their airwaves or things, and they had to be like, no, 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 it's Navajo. And then they had before they did anything, they had to say like Arizona from like now on, so they like knew that it was them, like they're starting their own code, which I feel like people would crack that earlier, but whatever. Um, and I was like, oh my God, they're such nerds that they don't know what Japanese sounds like and what Navajo sounds like. And then when I was listening to it, I was like, okay, I could see how you could think this might be Japanese, listening to like a little bit in my book. And I don't have any examples. I'm not even going to try. But then I was like, oh, I'm listening to this book at 2.5 speed. If I slow it down, it sounds insane. But also, if I slow down the English, that sounds insane because it's not my vibe. So the answer is I get why they
It's
might have thought
understandable.
it was Japanese. Yeah. But and I was like, did they talk fast when they were doing their code? I feel like probably. But you have to be precise, but you also have to be fast.
And you're talking about like 18-year-old kids from Wisconsin. Like
Yeah.
they probably aren't going to decipher Japanese from Mandarin from anything.
Yeah. So they like the they also each of the code talkers because they were so important because they needed to get messages from island to island, and it had to be unbreakable. It had to be able to do it. Things that are like there is a sniper, anything from there's a sniper on this tower because they were going to these places where the Japanese had like dug in miles and miles into the island and they had like literally were like dug into the ground, had foxholes. They were hiding in trees. Like there was one time when there was an earthquake and there all of a sudden all these Japanese soldiers were falling out of the palm trees on the island. They didn't even know they were there, So like they're just sharing all this information with each other. Um, and they also had bodyguards for a couple of reasons, like probably to make sure they didn't fall into enemy hands. but also to keep them safe because they were super important and because every once in a while another US soldier would think that they were Japanese and try to kill them.
Rough
But
going.
yeah, so that was rough. Um, they were invaluable at Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima. They also, oh, I said that they the swimming part. Um, they in also in Navajo, you don't um, spend time with a dead body. Like that's not really part of their culture as well. So it was really hard for them. Obviously, it was hard for everybody, but like, literally your buddies are dying, and there's like dead bodies everywhere. And in like the Navajo tradition, if someone dies in your hogan, which is your house, you never live there again. No one ever lives there again.
I kind of get
Which
that.
I don't know where people die then, but also, you know, so that was like a
Does
huge,
that mean you just take when they're like on their last breath, you just take them out in the yard?
right. I thought about that yesterday and I don't know the answer to that.
That's not good either.
Yeah. So, um, the first, so at one point the Japanese were like, they figured out somehow that it was Navajo and they captured another Navajo soldier. And that guy, he survived the war, but he was like, I can't crack this code. He was like, I can tell you the words they're saying, but I don't know what it means.
Which is
So
why I thought I thought they were literally gonna just be speaking in Navajo because the language was so rare, but the fact that they turned into a code as well is like very impressive.
yeah, exactly. They had like learn another language on top of their language.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were invaluable in Iwo Jima. The first 2 days at Iwo Jima, they transmitted 800 messages over 2 days with no mistakes. So just like back and forth, war plans, where are the guys? What are you seeing? What's going on? Where usually those things would take like an hour to do each message, and they could do it instantly because they were just talking to each other, you know? 13 of the code talkers were killed in action. Some of them were killed, just by like enemy fire because they're just like fighting from foxhole to foxhole. Major Howard Connor, signal officer of the 5th Marine Division at Iwo Jima, said, "If it were not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. We couldn't have done it without them." You'll also remember Ira Hayes. He was not a Navajo, he was a Pima, but he's what the Native American in that famous Iwo Jima picture of them with the flag,
Oh, nice.
which by the way was staged.
I heard
And
that was staged. Yeah.
yeah, I guess like the guy wanted the original flag, so they went and did it again. And I think that man, Ira Hayes, has a pretty sad life after this. But there were, just to say, there were plenty of other Native American people that were in the war as well. So they stayed all the way through the Pacific War until the Japanese surrendered and it was over. A lot of it the stuff that I was reading about like the end of the war that I think would be interesting to talk about later is like, how they like really believed the Emperor Hirohito was God.
Yes.
And like when he talked and when he actually like said that he was surrendering, people like didn't believe it because they'd never heard him before.
Right.
Like just wild stuff and how the Japanese were just like fighting till the last man. But the war ends and they go home. Some of them stay in the military and have military careers, but a lot of people just go home, and they cannot talk about their code. It's used a little bit in Korea and Vietnam, but they were also like pretty sure they were about to head into another hot war with Russia. So they were like, we have to keep this secret. So they went home and their papers said this guy was a regular Marine, whatever. Nothing that like this person like was able to strategically create this code and do these things under this immense pressure and all these things. They couldn't tell anyone about it and they didn't. They kept it a
Yeah,
secret.
it's like the CIA where like every spy that dies is just like a black star.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll never know. Yeah.
Like what they did. So it was kind of hard for them to get jobs. Also, they obviously encountered tons of racism when they got home. So they would like be on their way home in their military uniform and like try to go to a restaurant and they'd get kicked out because it would be like no Indians here, like that was still happening all over. Um, um, and then a lot of them also they couldn't get the GI Bill because to help them like build a home or go to college because it didn't count on the Navajo Nation. So they were like, oh, you can build a house, but you can't build it there. Stuff like that. That like made it
Wait,
harder
so
for
they
them.
could build a house. They just couldn't do it because Navajo Nation is a sovereign entity and
Yeah.
okay.
Even though they fought for the United States.
But it's a sovereign nation.
But they fought for the United States. You know what I mean? Like they weren't in like the Navajo military. They were in the United States Marines.
But wouldn't the sovereign nation have to grant exemptions to allow them to build a home there?
No, no, no. They could like physically build a home, but the GI Bill is supposed to help them give them money to build a home.
but they were trying to build a home on the Navajo Nation's land.
Right, but they didn't get that money from the GI Bill. So they could do it. They just didn't get that like boost that you would get if you built anywhere else.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it's not. It's the money was to build a home in America,
Yeah, I guess.
but it's a different legal entity.
But they fought for America. I don't know. I feel like they should get it, but there's probably a case for them not getting it.
That's like me trying to get money to build a house in Costa Rica. And it's like, no, no, no. Like this is the GI Bill. Like
But after you've risked your life for the Costa Rican army and they gave everybody else money, I don't know. It made it harder for them,
okay. We'll stick
essentially.
with that.
Sure. Also, a lot of them had PTSD, but they couldn't talk about it, obviously, which is like probably everyone who came home from war ever. Just a lot of PTSD. They would do, a lot of them did ceremonies at home where they would have like it's like a several day long ceremony where you try to like get the bad thoughts out of you and like people come to your house and you work on it together. So a lot of them just did that because they weren't able to like talk about what they had done, but they knew that they had like, obviously they had like terrible dreams all the time because they were in war. Um, Chester Nez, one of the guy whose book I read, he went to school, art school, got married, and he had some like personal troubles. Some of his kids passed away early, but anyway, he like, lived his life, and a lot of them just kind of went off and lived regular lives. In 1968, it finally became declassified. So they finally were like, we're not going to use the code anymore. So they were able to talk about what they did, and their families were like shocked that they had done this. Like they didn't know that they had created this code and how important it had been. And Chester Nez's dad was still alive, which is nice. He got to know what happened. Um, People like knew that they had done stuff. They didn't know how exciting it was and how important it was. There's a lot of stuff dedicated to the Navajo Code Talkers now. In 1982, Reagan declared August 14th as National Navajo Code Talker Day. There's a bunch of ceremonies and celebrations. There's a bronze statue of them at the Navajo Nation's Veterans Memorial in Window Rock, Arizona. In 2001, the original 29 Navajo Code Talkers were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, and all of the rest of them, so the other 300 and such, were received the silver medal. On July 26, 2001, George Bush gave the gold medals to four of the five remaining code talkers. So a lot of them had passed away, but there were five left. The
Nice.
fifth one was too sick to make it, but they got that. So they go around, I think they're all dead by now, but they went around talking about what they had done and how proud they were. Especially, I think underneath the thing that was like the American government as much as possible to erase me speaking this language, and then it became very important. You
Yeah.
know, it's like kind of their main thing. Um, Chester Nez talks about in the book reading. He was one of the original 29. He talks about blessing himself. He brought corn pollen to the beaches in Guadalcanal to kind of bless himself, and they would pray to the Catholic God and all the old gods. Um, just to be able to like help protect their country, meaning the United States and like that land, and then also like their friends and family. And then I have a prayer that they would say. A lot of them would repeat when they were in battle. This prayer it's in English, and so just to know it's probably more beautiful in Navajo, but it is called Walk in Beauty prayer. This is a short version, but it's still pretty long. But this is what a lot of them would say to each other as they were trying to psych themselves up to do this. In beauty may I walk, all day long may I walk. Through the returning seasons may I walk. Beautifully will I possess again, beautifully birds, beautifully joyful birds. On the trail marked with pollen may I walk, with grasshoppers about my feet may I walk, with dew about my feet may I walk, with beauty may I walk. With beauty before me may I walk, with beauty behind me may I walk, with beauty above me may I walk, with beauty below me may I walk. With beauty all around me may I walk, in old age, wandering on a trail of beauty. Lively may I walk, in old age, wandering on a trail of beauty. Living again may I walk. My words will be beautiful. So they would say that to each other to get them through.
They should have augmented that to be something along the lines of in the swamps covered in mosquitoes, man, walk.
Exactly.
Even where they ended up.
Um, it was like a totally different alien environment. Um, but yeah, I feel like someday I'll watch Wind Talkers, the Nick Cage movie.
Come on, we got to support our boy Nick.
We do. So he can get out, he can buy some more castles and such. But yeah, isn't that cool? I don't
That
know.
is cool.
Isn't that cool?
I never knew that. So I only knew the Nick Cage movie, and I never watched that.
Hmm.
So I never actually knew anything about this. We learned a lot in school about like the Native American cultures in
Hmm.
Texas. I forgot who they are now. I mean, I don't retain information at all. Um,
But you always like, I
Wigwams.
feel like every American kid did a report. For instance, did one on the Shoshone, you know?
We did dioramas. We did a lot of dioramas. I
Yeah,
remember wigwams were a big part of my youth, and so
exactly. Like I feel like the Navajo I feel in Infinity Forks, I think that was my like third grade project.
who were the ones in Texas?
I don't know. There's probably a fair amount of them. I mean, obviously, Texas is huge. Like you could find out like what native land is Austodon. So yeah, like Austin is on, it says traditional various groups. There's like the Tonkawa live in Central Texas, and the Comanche and Apache move through the area. That's what UT says.
Yeah, we got Comanche, Apache, Caddo, Karankawa, Tonkawa, Wichita. Well, Wichita's a Native American word.
Hmm.
Atacapa. There's a lot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like it's a lot, and I'm sure it also like I think that the history is simplified. Like because we put them into a bucket, like all the Navajo, but they weren't all the exact same until we like pushed them all in the same direction. Because it was just like small groups, and they probably changed a bunch.
Yeah, eventually, homogeneity is a component of all this stuff, right?
Hmm.
Well, called assimilation in modern terms, but sweet.
Yeah,
No, that was very informative. Did not know that, and now I do.
yeah, no, you do.
So
Super, super cool. I feel like it's something that like my dad used to always talk about getting a second job as a Navajo Code talker. So I feel like I've heard about it a lot because my dad just always brings it up like my whole life, and like without knowing a lot of the details, he just talked about it a lot. I don't know why.
yeah, it's interesting. Like, despite the colonization aspect of most things, I think Texas is unique in a lot of ways, and I think one of the ways it's unique is that you don't go very far without being reminded of like the
Yeah,
Native American culture here. I
California I
mean,
think is very similar as well. Yeah.
like I'm thinking about like the my I'm looking at some of these paintings and these artworks about that captured Native American life, and I'm like I see these everywhere I go, like bars,
Hmm.
restaurants, hotels. Like
Hmm.
it is ubiquitous here,
Yeah.
which is good.
Yeah, it's good.
I did go to this one store. It's called Pinto Ranch, Taylor, and they sell a lot of like higher end stuff that I can't afford. And one of the stuff they had was this like beautiful, beautiful statue. It was kind of abstract, but it was mostly of like a Native American chief. And it was just like positioned in the middle of the store. I was like, wow, that's a really like that's cool. Like, I mean, it
Hmm.
looked very unique. It didn't look like a typical statue of a person. It was like
Hmm.
he was turning from feathers into a chieftain with like
Cool.
the headdress on and everything. It was really,
Hmm.
really interesting. Then I looked down and it was for sale for $120,000. I was like, I gotta get the fuck out of here.
Um, I also in the novel that I read, it was they said, and I'm sure this is true, that they would call all of the Navajo chief. Like, they would like nickname him that, like, "Hey, chief," and like one of the guys got sick of it. He goes, "Hey, Mr. President," and they were like, "Okay, we get it."
Is that why we say chief to people now?
Yeah, I don't think it's like not racist. I think it was like you would just say that to like the one Native person you knew in your like troop.
Interesting. Okay.
Um, but yeah, so like this up doing that, which is funny. Yeah.
Sweet. Anything else to read off before we sign off?
Yes. Once again, thank you to Nadine and Juan for joining our Patreon. And then I also had another thing I wanted to add from last week. I forgot to tell you that, how I said that Grafton, New Hampshire with the Libertarians was kind of like the Anabaptist going to Munster?
Yeah.
A thing that I forgot to tell you is that before the Libertarians went to Grafton, the Moonies went to Grafton. Do you know who the Moonies are?
No.
So they're this like church, they call themselves a Unification Church, which is like a part. of it's a cult essentially. But essentially it is a man named a Korean man named Soon Mung Moon. He's not alive anymore, but he would like obviously like take everybody's money and like they would have to like give up all of their things and like do everything for this man. And they are famous for doing these like mass weddings. If you ever look them up, it's like 200 people getting married at the same time, and they just like I watched a
I
documentary
remember
about it
this.
a long time ago, but it was like someone was like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to England to meet my husband." Like they never met. They just like pair people up and have them get married in these mass weddings. So it was just like another reason that Grafton for somehow like attracts these people who want to like live on the fringes and do different things.
I remember this. I remember when I was a kid and the news covered these mass weddings.
Hmm.
I never knew there was more of a story behind it, but as with everything, there's wow, Moons was sentenced to federal prison in Denver. Okay, this guy sounds like he was pretty bad.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, it's not
All
great.
right,
But that is it.
sweet. All right.
Thank you.
Write to us. Tell us what you think at doomtofellpod@gmail.com, on all the socials at doomtofellpod, and we'll join you again in a week. Thank you, Taylor.
Cool. Thank you.